Squidward's suicide. Original author, unknown. I want to start off by saying that if you want the answers at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios in the year 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course. Most internships aren't. But it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it might not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I work directly with editors and animators, I get to view the new episodes before they're aired. I'll get right to it without giving any unnecessary details. They had very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat zapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season. But the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animator and the sound editor for the final cut. We received the copy of what was supposed to be Fear of the Krabby Patty and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that this isn't the final cut yet, animators often put up a mock card, sort of an inside joke for us, with phony, sometimes lewd titles, such as How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of Rockabye Bivalve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think more of it than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music played as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. Bubbles splash across the screen and comes up with the ending of the Squidward's concert. Things start to seem a little bit off here. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, the sound is synced up with the animation, so yes, that's not common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened. There's a light murmuring in the crowd before they begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing. That's common in the show. But you could hear clear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and he looks visibly afraid. The shot then goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in the center frame. He too is booing. Very much unlike SpongeBob. This isn't the oddest thing though. What was odd is everyone had hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed. Clearly not shot of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused, and since we aren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children. Yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The view out of his porthole window is of the night sky, so it's not very long after the concert. The unsettling part at this is there's no sound. Literally, no sound. Not even feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, but their status showed him working just fine. He just sat there, blinking, in silence for about 30 seconds. Then started to sob softly. He put his hands or tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound was growing in the background. Very slowly growing, from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze going through the forest. The screen slowly starts to zoom in on his face. And by slow I mean, it's only noticeable if you look at shots 10-second apart side by side. The sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen twitches a bit, as if it twists in on itself. For a split second, then back to normal. The wind through the trees sound gets louder and more severe, as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, and Squidward sobbing sounded real, as if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes and the sound was coming from the other side. As good of a sound quality as the studio likes to have, they didn't purchase equipment that would be this good to produce this quality of sound. Below the sound of the wind and the sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so I had a hard time pinning it down. We watched this show twice, so pardon me if things sound too specific, but I've had a hard time thinking about them. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused this and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was just horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloody. One eye dangling over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear. His stomach was crudely cut open, and his entrails were lying beside him. He was laying on some pavement. It was probably a road. The most upsetting part was the shadow of the photographer. There was no criminal tape, no evidence tags or markers. The angle was completely off for it to be shot as evidence. It would seem that the photographer was just some person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressing on, hoping it was some kind of sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before and half the body in frame. There now was what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eye. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded as if it were that of a gale blowing through the forest. There was even the sound of snapping branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen then twisted again and showed a single frame photo. The editor was reluctant, to say the least, to go back. We all were, but he knew that he had to. This time, the photo is what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was popped out too, and popped, naked except for her underpants. Her entrails were also on top of her, above a crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on a street and the photographer's shadow was visible. Very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and the one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. We resumed the show. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all the sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down and his eyes were done in the hyper-realism, like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After about 10 seconds, he started sobbing, this time not covering his eyes. The sound was piercing and loud, and the most fear-inducing of all was that the sobbing was mixed with screams. Tears and blood were dripping down his face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back, and so did the deep voice laughing. This time, the photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The animator was able to stop it on the 4th and back up. This time, the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the scene was different. The entrails were being pulled out of a stomach wound by a large hand, and the right eye was popped out and dangling, blood trickling down from it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next. Same thing. He went back to the first and played him quicker, and I lost it. I vomited right there on the floor. The animating and sound editors gasped at the screen. The 5 frames, they weren't 5 different photos. They were played out as if frames in a video. We all saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eyes focus on it, and we saw 2 frames of the kid blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call the creator to see this. Mr. Heelenberg arrived about 15 minutes later. He was confused as to why we called him down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, all screaming and all sound stopped again. Squidward just stared at the viewer, full frame of the face for about 3 seconds. The shot quickly panned out and a deep voice said, "Do it." And we see in Squidward's hands a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters all over the wall behind him, his bed, and his face flies back with force. The last 5 seconds of the episode was his body on the bed, on his side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. Then the episode ends. Mr. Hillenberg was obviously angry at this. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at this point, so it was just a handful of us there to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the entirety of it on my mind and gave me horrible nightmares. I'm so sorry that I stayed. The only theory we could think of was that the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called in to analyze what happened. The analysis of the file showed that it was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it was a mere 24 seconds before we all began viewing it. All of the equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed us the wrong time. But everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, nobody does. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified and no clues were gathered from the data or the physical clues in the photo. I never believed in unexplainable phenomenon before now, but now that I have had something happen to me that I can't prove beyond anecdotal evidence, I like to think twice about things. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, please consider becoming a patron. That's linked down in the description. The current patrons at the $10 and above tier are Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, and Chaos X. And as a little incentive to go over to the Patreon, I'm going to start doing videos that aren't really YouTube appropriate. So I'll upload them unlisted, and then only patrons at the $5 and above tier will get to listen to them. There'll be the ones that are a little more extreme, things I don't want to put out on YouTube, just out there flat. So if you want some access to some exclusive stories and things like that, definitely consider becoming a patron. I currently am working on the first one, about halfway done with it. So if you're in that category, you'll get it within a week, I promise. Thank you.